Buenas tardes, Guyana. Buenos días, México. A todas y a todos que nos hacen favor de vernos aquí en Latinidades, desde el estado de Nuevo León, les damos la bienvenida. Seguimos con nuestra misión de hablar con todos los países que conforman la patria grande, es decir, América Latina y el Caribe. Seguimos con la idea de acercar el continente al Caribe y el Caribe al continente. Hoy estamos con Guyana y con nosotros un escritor, educador, teólogo y político activista, líder del partido de izquierda Organización para la Victoria de la Gente, Gerald Perreira. Gracias por estar aquí.
So, good afternoon to Guyana and Mexico. Welcome once again to Latinidades. And so we'd like to welcome you as we continue with our program of bringing Latin America and the Caribbean closer together. Today we have Guyana. We have Gerald Pereira, who's a writer, political activist. Good afternoon, Gerald.
Good afternoon to you, to everyone.
Thank you. Gerald, sé que tú has vivido en Libia y me gustaría mucho que nos puedas referir qué fue lo que pasó en esa situación que se dio con Libia, en ese ataque que hicieron los gobiernos, algunos gobiernos occidentales contra Libia, cuando estaba Muammar Gaddafi allá, y también, obviamente, cómo ves la situación después, ahora que él no está, que sabemos que es algo muy caótico.
So, Gerald, we
Yes.
know that you lived in Libia, so we're very interested to know how do you see the situation when there was that whole reality, when Gaddafi was there and the Western countries would have led the chaos within the country? And how do you see the situation now after the fact?
Te lo pregunto porque no es muy común hablar con alguien que estuvo allá o que está en Libia y que ahora está en Guyana. Entonces, nos gustaría que antes de empezar a hablar de Guyana, nos dijeras tú lo que tú sabes y la experiencia que tienes tú sobre lo que pasó en Libia, que sé que te sirve para Guyana y entonces poder empezar.
So I'm asking you because I know a lot of people who would have lived in Libya. We don't have this experience. And, how would that have impacted you, your personal experience? And how did you bring it back to Guyana?
Well, Libya had the highest standard of living in Africa. Education was free. Healthcare was free. There was a lot of, you didn't have to line up to get into a hospital or so. No one housing. The government had implemented a huge housing project that started decades ago, and they continued it at the time right until the collapse of the Gaddafi regime. And people who occupy, people who occupy,
Bueno, en Libia hubo el estándar de vivir una tasa de vivir que era lo más alto de toda África. Hubo educación y salud gratis. Y además hubo un gran proyecto de vivienda dentro del país. ¿Ya?
Yeah. The system, Libya referred to, Libya described themselves, the Libyan regime describes themselves as socialist, but their socialism was different to what you had in the Eastern Bloc, because Gaddafi never subscribed to what the Eastern Bloc had. So when you compare, for example, Libya with Egypt or Tunisia, there's tremendous poverty in Egypt, and you have in Tunisia. So you had thousands of workers. I think you had an estimated, I think you had about 1 million Egyptians in working and living in Libya, and you had Tunisians. And when that collapsed, people started moving out. So from day one, when this, it started off in Libya as a protest in Benghazi over some issue. And when Gaddafi heard of it, he said, let the people protest. Right?
Okay.
But then, yeah, go on.
Entonces, hubo el socialismo en Libia, pero lo que hizo Gaddafi no era la misma cosa que lo que había en el bloque del Este. Entonces, era otro tipo de socialismo que hubo en Libia. La calidad de vida era mejor. Hubo muchas personas que estaban viviendo bajo la pobreza en Egipto y en Tunisia. Y esas personas, esos trabajadores estaban trabajando, saliendo del país para estar dentro de Libia, para trabajar y vivir mejor. Y esa cosa empezó con una protesta sobre un problema que había en la ciudad. Y después Gaddafi dijo déjales protestar a la gente. Dejo al pueblo protestar sobre esa cuestión.
Yes, he even said that he will go and join the protesters. But then something happened. The so-called protesters started firing shots at one of the police stations, and suddenly you had groups of them appearing with weaponry, and one of the senior members of the revolutionary committees, because in Libya the system is different. You have a network of popular congresses and committees where the people make decisions at the base level, at the basic level, and then goes all the way at the top to be decided on, and then comes down to be ratified by the people. There was no political parties. The revolutionary committees were what you can refer to as the most conscious section of the population. They would have been like the equivalent of Lenin's vanguard, right? So their role was to organize the people and to guide the revolution, but not to become substitutes for the authority of the people. And that was an evolving, that is that a different democratic tradition. But when they realized that these are some of the protesters were firing shots, and so one of the senior members of the Revolutionary Committee called, this is what they said, from what I know, they sent Gaddafi and others to say that there is something not right here.
Okay, bueno, entonces Gaddafi dijo, yo puedo juntarme a esa protesta también, pero parece que una persona empezó a tirar balas y después tiraban balas, sí, dispararon a la policía también. Entonces hubo una persona con más experiencia, una de las personas con más experiencia del comité revolucionario, que dijo que hay algo que no está bien aquí y suena muy mal lo que está pasando. Y el sistema de Libia es que esos comités revolucionarios no funcionan como autoridades, sino toman las decisiones que salen de la base, van a discutirlo y después regresa a la base para que sea ratificada. Eso es la democracia de Libia. Entonces es un sistema diferente, pero cuando él observó esa cosa que estaba pasando con esas balas y todo eso, dijo que eso suena muy mal. Yashar?
Yes. So I think one of, because of course, Gaddafi enjoyed tremendous support, and I think the mistake that was made by the revolutionary forces and by Gaddafi was it was allowed to get somehow out of hand, because looking back, I would have believed the first thing they should have done from a military or a very military or strategic point of view, they should have sent in the Kandis Brigade, which is an elite fighting force. Because while the protests were taking place in Zimbabwe, the Western NATO with France and the US were already talking about this elite force, the Kandis Brigade. In other words, they knew what they were doing. There was some, the external forces knew that this was just no ordinary protest. They had it well organized, and they were talking about the Kandis Brigade before any action by the Kandis Brigade. So they were preparing that in case the Kandis Brigade go into action, what would be the response of NATO to them. So that tells you that it's a conspiracy theory, that they knew what they were about.
Entonces, cuando hablamos de lo que ocurrió, creo que era un error de las fuerzas revolucionarias de no enviar a la brigada Kandis, que es una brigada élite de fuerzas. Y parece que ya sabía las fuerzas las fuerzas occidentales, porque ellos estaban hablando de esa brigada bien antes de que fue enviada esa brigada para proteger a la gente. Entonces, yo creo que era un error porque perdieron el control de esa situación y ya sabían a OTAN y Francia que no era una protesta normal.
Yeah. And I just mentioned, it's called the head of the Kandis Brigade was one of Gaddafi's youngest son, Kandis, but they didn't name the brigade because of him. They named it. It was named after Kandis, who was an a Libyan who became a pharaoh who ruled Egypt for a number of years. So it was in that tradition, and Kandis was a fighter, so they named it. I guess Gaddafi named it his son after that Libyan pharaoh, and they named the brigade that. But then it started. Yeah, go on.
Entonces solamente quería añadir que el jefe de esa brigada era el hijo de Gaddafi, que se llamaba Kandis, pero la brigada no tuvo el nombre de él, obtuvo el nombre de un faraón de Egipto.
Un faraón de Egipto.
Faraón de Egipto que estaba en poder durante muchos años. Entonces es más como su hijo toma su nombre de ese faraón.
So while this protest was happening, a number of Dutch Marines landed on a beach not far from, I forget so many kilometers from Tripoli, the capital, and they were captured by loyalist forces. So you see, the invasion had begun. The CIA was already in the Nafusa, in the mountain range, bordering Egypt, and so they were already there. And it was all well planned. Even Sudan, when they imposed the no-fly zone, Sudan, that was sanctioned by the United States, and so Sudan agreed for NATO and the US to fly through their airspace to carry out the air campaign.
Entonces, era claro que era bien organizado por las fuerzas occidentales. Y ya estaba una cosa de CIA, porque hubo marinos que llegaron en la costa y fueron atrapados por fuerzas leales a Gaddafi. Y después hubo Sudán dio el permiso a los Estados Unidos de aprovechar de su
Espacio.
aeropuerto. Sí,
Espacio.
de su espacio para pasar sus aviones. Aún sí, era un momento en que no hubiera permiso de volar.
De acuerdo.
Yeah, and when the fighting started and what became a civil war, the so-called rebels never won one battle on the field. Every time the cities, the areas, the towns that they capture, they were pushed back. They were being beaten on the battlefield. And it reached a point where the servants, those who were being used by the Western powers and some surrogates in the Arab states, they were appealing for help. And Qatar sent in special forces. Qatar played a very important and a very wicked role in the overthrow of the regime. There were Qatari special forces. There were fighters, people who fought for Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. They were in the fight. So when Gaddafi turned to the world and said, I'm fighting Al-Qaeda, they were laughing at him. They were saying, oh, you know, when it was Libya was the first country to issue an international arrest warrant for Osama bin Laden. And the Western powers, everybody ignored it, right? It is only until when 9/11, then they all went. But these groups, many that were in the fighting against the regime in Libya, they were aided and abetted by the Western powers and countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So you had all of these players involved there. And then the loyalist forces were being overwhelmed. It also took on a sort of a racial dimension because...
Okay.
Yeah.
Bueno. Y sí, y los rebeldes, los llamados rebeldes, no estaban ganando la lucha, estaban perdiendo la lucha. Y después hubo personas que llegaron de Qatar y después de eso hubo personas que llegaron de Al-Qaeda. Entonces, cuando Gaddafi dijo que yo estoy luchando en contra de Al-Qaeda dentro de mi país, todo el mundo se burlaba de él, pero él era el primero que quería arrestar a Osama bin Laden. Hubo fuerzas especiales de Qatar que estaban dentro del país para apoyar a la lucha dentro de lo que era una guerra civil. Entonces hubo también el apoyo de Arabia Saudí. Sí, para apoyar a la lucha y todas las fuerzas del occidente para apoyar en esta lucha contra las personas que eran leal a Gaddafi. Entonces, era mucho más que lo que salió.
Then there were some, like there was a particular militia known as the Misurata Brigade that the leadership is made up of and still made up of well-known, what we refer to as Arab supremacists. They were disseminating, peddling the lie that Gaddafi forces were being supported by mercenaries. And they were saying that these mercenaries were from what you call Sahelian countries like Mali, Niger, and sub-Saharan Africa. And what really, and that there were mercenaries, the BBC, CNN, all of them. There were no mercenaries there. Those fighters were, the majority of them were Black Libyans who, there's a town called Tawarga, where you find the Tawarga tribe, dominated by the Tawarga tribe. They are dark-skinned, they're Black Libyans, and they have been from 1969, when the revolution was made, right up to the destruction of January. They were strong supporters of Gaddafi. So these Black Libyans who were fighting for Gaddafi, and some freedom fighters who fled their countries years ago in Africa because they were persecuted, who were residing in Libya, they decided to fight because they were living there, enjoying all the benefits. Their children were being educated for free, medical care and everything, and they were living there for years. So they said, we have to fight. And the Western media, they were portraying this, that there were no mercenaries.
Bueno, además hubo esa brigada Maserati que tenía esa propaganda de esa idea de mercenarios. Aún CNN, BBC, estaban hablando de mercenarios, pero no estaban mercenarios. Hubo personas de una ciudad, un pueblo, Tawari, yes, Gerald, Tawari.
Yeah, Tawarga.
Tawarga,
Yeah.
que eran libios negros que querían luchar, que apoyaban a Gaddafi. Y además hubo algunos luchadores para libertad, freedom fighters, que estaban viviendo dentro de Libia y estaban aprovechando de todos sus beneficios. Entonces dijeron que tenemos que luchar. No había mercenarios.
The other lie that was being peddled by the so-called rebels, the loyalists, we refer to them as rat bells, not rebels. Anyhow, yeah, go on.
Hubo otra mentira que salió de esos rebeldes, que no estaban llamados rebeldes, sino ratón verdes dentro del país.
Yeah, so the other lie that they were peddling was that there were snipers, female snipers who were well-trained and very deadly, this is what they were saying, who originated from Colombia in South America.
La otra cosa era que hubo francotiradoras de Colombia que estaban bien entrenados y muy peligrosas que estaban viviendo dentro de Libia.
Mira, está interesante eso porque ya sabemos que hay colombianos apoyando allá a Ucrania como mercenarios en la guerra con Rusia.
This is very interesting because we know that the Colombian mercenaries supporting in the war with Ukraine and Russia.
Y también que este tipo de mercenarios estuvieron detrás del asesinato del presidente de Haití.
And these same mercenaries were behind the the assassination of the Haitian president.
De toda esta experiencia que viviste tú, Gerald, allá en Libia, ¿cómo la empleas o de qué sientes que te sirve ahorita que estás en Guyana?
So all of this experience, how do you think that it serves you there in Guyana?
Before I go to Guyana, just quickly to wrap off on that Colombia. They were never able to show a captured Colombian or a dead Colombian. Let me tell you how the Colombian factor came in. Many years ago, Libya supported some of the FARC fighters, and the M19 received military training in Libya. I was there when they were receiving training and so. I met Navarro Wolf, who was from the M19, and then the M19 became an electoral formation. Good. So they were just using that. They were just using that because those two groups, those two guerrilla groups I identified, had received support from Libya. You know, and they were, yeah, and of course they were fighting not only the Colombian army, but many of those Colombian right-wing paramilitaries that went to Haiti and now maybe is fighting too in Ukraine.
Solamente quiero cerrar ese punto sobre Libia y esa cuestión de Colombia, que salió solamente porque Gaddafi apoyaba a los FARC y al M19. Entonces, solamente hubo esa cosa y por eso salió esas mentiras y nunca hubo muerte de un colombiano y nunca hubo una presencia o imagen de un colombiano dentro de esta lucha.
De acuerdo. Y entonces, esto que viviste o que te ayudó a formar de alguna forma una visión política, ¿cómo la empleas ahorita que estás en Guyana?
So tell us now, how is it
Yeah.
applied to Guyana?
Now, first of all, one of the things a number of things that I learned over the years and made you look at things in a different way is Guyana, we discover a tremendous amount of oil and gas. And I always say to the young generation here that the oil and gas can flow like the waters of the Kaichur Falls, our highest fall. And if they live to see 75 or 80, it will be the same. Why? Because it's not about the resources. We know countries that are rich in resources and yet their people are in poverty. It's about the type of economic system you have that will democratize wealth and democratize wealth by taking some control, decisive state intervention in the economy. We don't have that in Guyana. We have a hands-off state. They indulge in some forms of the outlook more. All the major parties, including the ruling party, is no longer to the left. I don't even think they're social democratic. They're more social liberal to an extent in terms of what they do. They don't.
Yo siempre tuve esa perspectiva de que sí tenemos esa gran riqueza de petróleo dentro del país en este momento. Podemos siempre tener ese petróleo, puede fluir como agua dentro del país, pero lo que será lo más importante será el modelo que tenemos dentro del país. Y hay que tener un modelo en que hay hay un apoyo o hay aportes del pueblo, hay aportes del Estado dentro de lo que está pasando. Lo que tenemos es una administración que tiene como manos fuera de lo que está pasando dentro del país. No es un modelo socialista, no es democrática, es casi social, liberal lo que tenemos.
Y bueno, estoy plenamente consciente de que Guyana tiene una nueva riqueza petrolera. Sabemos que incluso Arabia Saudita se acercó recientemente para solicitarle que entrara a la OPEP. Y sabemos también perfectamente que cuando hay petróleo, siempre hay problemas.
So, we do know about this wealth that's happening, and we also know that the Saudi Arabia recently would have engaged with Guyana to try and welcome the country into the OPEC.
Yeah.
And we know that whenever there's wealth in oil, there are always problems.
Correct. Correct.
¿Cómo piensan ustedes desde la izquierda que se puedan manejar o resolver estos problemas? Porque la mayoría de las veces son a través de intereses extranjeros, unidos con la oligarquía local, los que buscan apoderarse de este recurso exclusivamente para ellos.
Yeah.
So how do you think that from the left you can manage the problems that are happening within the country? Because we know that when you have all this wealth, it's usually foreign hands that are coming in, trying to take advantage of it with the support of the oligarchs that are trying to get more wealth for themselves.
Correct.
So how do you see it?
Well, before I get there was a period in Guyana's political history from the early 70s, from 1969, but 70s, 71, right up to the 90s, somewhere around up to when the Eastern Bloc collapsed. We had the two major parties, the one that was in government under Forbes Burnham, and the main opposition under Chedi Jagan, PPP, People's Progressive Party, that is now in office. And you had the Working People's Alliance, which was led by his famous historian, Walter Rodney. So these were the three major forces, and all three were to the left. They all described themselves as socialists. They all said they were anti-imperialists. And when the Eastern Bloc collapsed, every one of these parties lost their bearings. Chedi Jagan came into office in 1992 as the president. And he agreed quietly with the Americans not to rock the boat. He was talking about a just global order and all of that. But there was nothing seriously done to redress the structural imbalances in the economy and elsewhere, you know?
Okay. Bueno, antes de hablar de lo que está pasando ahora, quiero decir que en los años 70, tal vez 69, 71 y hacia los años 90, hubo partidos de la izquierda. Hubo el partido de Chedi Jagan, el Partido Progresista de los Pueblos, PPP. Hubo la influencia de Walter Rodney, un gran histórico.
Working People's Alliance.
Sí, bajo la alianza de los pueblos trabajadores. Y remind me of the third one, Gerald, sorry.
People's National Congress.
Ajá, el Congreso Nacional de los Pueblos bajo de Forbes Burnham. Todos esos partidos están de la izquierda. Y después, ¿qué ocurrió? Ganó Chedi Jagan.
Yeah.
Y cuando ganó, él no quería causar problemas. Entonces, empezó a trabajar con los Estados Unidos para no tener problemas dentro del país. Estaba hablando de esa idea de un mundo más justo, pero de práctica no hizo ningún cambio estructural, nada. Entonces, eso es la realidad.
¿Qué problema? Es algo muy complicado la situación que me están planteando. ¿Cómo la piensan desde el partido que liderea Gerald corregir? ¿Cuál es la situación de la izquierda allá? ¿Con qué lucha? ¿Cuáles son los factores que tiene en contra ahorita en Guyana? ¿Y cómo piensan corregirlos?
Yeah.
So that's a very complicated situation that you put before me there. So how do you see that now from the left? How do you think that you're going to continue with your struggle? What do you say are your struggles there right now to continue existing?
Okay. Brother Hector would know that there's always been a revolutionary left tradition critical of the Soviet model, right? Our own CLR James in the Caribbean, who was a Marxist and socialist, he was built, and you had others, you know, in a socialist tradition that was called Arab socialism, or articulated by some Arab political thinkers like Michel Aflaq and others, Gaddafi and those people, who, when the Eastern Bloc collapsed, I remember Gaddafi saying, socialism did not collapse. You know, it's now to fight for socialism. That's a bastardized version. He said that. Anyhow, what happened was, after the Eastern Bloc collapsed, those parties that had close relations with Russia or communists or socialists, they shifted course and they moved to the right. You always had the traditional right-wing parties, and the ones who were meant to be on the left, who were on the left yesterday, and today you the right. But in Guyana as such, there's only one left-wing formation, and that is the organization that I belong to, that I lead, and that's the Organization for the Victory of People. We make it clear that we are anti-capitalist, we are socialists, not in the tradition of the Marxist-Leninists. Of course, you can draw from Marx. No one can deny the great contribution of Karl Marx. You can acknowledge all of that without being a Marxist. And we're not communists, and we're not anti-communists. We're just non-communists. We will work with the communists because we fight for the same goals and objectives. We are strong supporters of the Cuban Revolution. We defend the Cuban Revolution, and we'll always defend it. And Cuba counts on us. We're anti-imperialists, and Cuba has done a lot for us, and we know that. But ideologically, we're not communists. And that more has to do with our rejection of dialectical materialism, because we acknowledge a metaphysical dimension to all civilizations. Hence, we believe in God and so on. But that is not the fundamental contradiction. The fundamental contradiction is the struggle between the oppressed and the oppressors. So we don't allow these type of debates to get into our arena. So recently, okay, you go on, and then I'll get
A ver si nos puedes traducir.
Sí, como ya sabes, compa, siempre hubo los que criticaban al modelo del bloque del este, y aún CLR James de Trinidad y Tobago criticaba este modelo. Entonces, ¿qué ocurrió con la caída de ese bloque? Es que las personas que estaban con las aliados del bloque se pusieron a la derecha. Siempre hubo personas a la derecha, pero después hubo esas personas que cambiaron de posición y estaban más de derecha. Entonces hubo esa realidad y aun si el partido que está en el poder es el partido de Charillagan, ahora en Guyana, no hay partido de la izquierda. El único partido de la izquierda es el partido de Gerald, lo que es su partido político. Entonces, cuando hablamos de la izquierda, somos anticapitalista, somos antiimperialista, pero no nos llamamos marxistas, leninistas, porque tenemos la creencia en la metafísica, creemos en Dios, pero lo más importante es que hay la lucha de los oprimidos en contra de los que hacen la opresión. Entonces, eso es claro para nosotros. Siempre apoyamos a Cuba y siempre estamos allá con nuestros hermanos comunistas también.
Interesante que nos estés diciendo, Kandis, que nos hagas el favor de traducir. Gracias que has estado tú apoyándonos en todas estas charlas por acercar el Caribe al continente, te lo agradecemos. Y es interesante lo que nos está diciendo Gerald en relación a que la postura, cuál es, y que es el único partido de izquierda en Guyana. Eso habla de la situación que viven, el que solo haya una expresión de izquierda. Quiere decir que realmente el modelo que trabaja en Guyana pues es neoliberal y totalmente de derecha, en la que la izquierda apenas está trabajando opciones frente a ese modelo.
So, thank you, Candice, for your amazing work for translation. But
yes, your translation is amazing. It's great.
Thank you. But it's very interesting what you're telling us about this reality, which is neoliberal within Guyana, and you just have to work within that model on the left.
No, well, if we examine the history of the neoliberal model, or what sometimes is termed when it came out with the Washington Consensus. And it was imposed on Guyana during, after President Burnham died. The incoming president from his party, Desmond Hoyt, changed the name of the party from People's National Congress to People's National Congress Reform. So all the socialist principles and objectives were tossed aside. And openly, the ruling party today, if you go to their constitution, they haven't removed some of those reference to Marx and so they leave it because they keep that to keep fooling their friends at the international level. You see, that's what they do. But we who are here, we know the difference because recently, not too long, when the president assumed office, he invited all the small parties to meet it. And we were left out. In fact, a commentator wrote a piece titled Birds of a Feather. And the commentator was saying that the president invited all these small parties to have dialogue, to have a discussion. But he's quite certain that he did not invite this party, which he was making was referenced as the OVP, because he said we are the only political organization in Guyana that has defined ourselves ideologically. The others have not done that.
Bueno, cuando hablamos de ese modelo neoliberal fue impuesto bajo ese partido de Burnham. Después de que salió Burnham de ese partido con todas las referencias al socialismo, etcétera, hubo ese cambio con el nuevo jefe de ese partido y sacó todo esto de sus principios y cambió el nombre. Solamente agregó esa palabra de reforma sobre el partido. Entonces, eso ahora no tiene esos principios más de socialismo. Del otro partido de Charillagan, todavía existen esos principios dentro de su constitución, pero ya sabemos que no trabajan con esos principios dentro del país. Y cuando ganaron el gobierno, invitaron a todos los demás partidos más pequeños para tener una charla, pero no invitó al partido de Gerald, a OVP, y dijo que solamente excluyó a ese partido porque es bien claro su postura ideológica. Y los demás no lo tienen. Micro.
Perdón, eso fue un cumplido, el que no lo hubieran invitado a Gerald. Es un buen cumplido, el que no lo hubieran invitado, porque lo están reconociendo entonces que es diferente.
And that is a great accomplishment because they're recognizing that you're different.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Thank you for that. You see, but we are growing. We have embarked on a mass recruitment, and there are people who coming over to us. Many of the people who live in the most impoverished and marginalized communities. But the thing is, there's a number of right-wing political parties, and this National Endowment for Democracy, that we call the National Endowment for the Destruction of Democracy, and the International Republican Institute, they are heavily involved in funding and training the leadership of these right-wing parties and center-right formations.
Entonces, sí, gracias, muchas gracias por eso. Pero en este momento estamos tratando de ampliar, pero con muchas personas, una gran ampliación con personas de comunidades empobrecidos y marginalizados. Pero además hay los partidos de la derecha, hay dos partidos y uno que se llama el Partido Nacional para la Democracia, y lo llamamos el Partido Nacional para la Destrucción de la Democracia. Y el otro partido, sí, el otro partido que está tratando de formar a personas jóvenes para tener esa perspectiva más de la derecha también.
Interesante que la derecha esté trabajando ya para seguir robando y saqueando el país.
It's interesting that the right is already there trying to keep stealing and exploiting the country.
Yes, yes, correct. Absolutely.
Me llama mucho la atención la personalidad de Gerald, lo veo muy apasionado, muy comprometido con lo que hace. Y para mí, ajá, dilo, por favor. Ajá.
I'm quite impressed with Gerald's personality, who's appears to be so passionate and committed in the cause.
Y siempre es interesante descubrir personalidades así fuera del continente, porque a veces creemos que en el continente está todo. Y a través de estas charlas me he dado cuenta que en el Caribe hay personalidades cuya estatura es igual o más grande que las que tenemos aquí.
Because within the continent, we don't always recognize that there are people outside of the continent that are so passionate about these things. So it's very nice to see. And we realize that within the Caribbean, there are people with that type of character that are on the same level or even greater.
Yeah.
Well, please, please, go ahead.
I think my sister Kandis is also very passionate.
I know.
Creo que Kandis también.
Creo que es importante recordarle también a Gerald que así como nosotros tenemos que darnos cuenta y acercar el Caribe, él también tiene que acercar el continente. Él debe saber también que no está solo en esta lucha, porque de alguna forma compartimos esas tareas que él hace allá en Guyana para poder romper las estructuras capitalistas y neoliberales que les imponen.
So I just want to remind our brother Gerald that he's not alone, and that we're trying to get closer to the Caribbean, but the Caribbean has to get closer to us as well, because these exact same struggles, we have them as well, to break down all of these neoliberal and capitalist structures that exist.
That's right, that's right.
Y que cuenta con nosotros en América y especialmente desde México, por si necesitar algún apoyo, alguna difusión, algo que con lo que pudiéramos apoyar la causa del partido de izquierda que él liderea allá en Guyana.
And you can always count on us in America, and of course specifically in Mexico, for any type of support or dissemination that is required to support your struggle there in Guyana.
Yes, thank you.
No, les quiero agradecer a ambos este tiempo que nos dieron para poder oír la voz de la izquierda desde Guyana, porque sabemos perfectamente que a veces eso no pasa, que los medios de derecha solo tratan a los países del Caribe o los ven cuando sucede, por desgracia, una tragedia humana, como un huracán, por poner un ejemplo.
So, I thank both of you for allowing us to know what's happening in Guyana and in all of the Caribbean, because unfortunately, the mass media only talks about the Caribbean when there's some sort of natural disaster, hurricane, for example.
That's right, that's right.
Entonces, me gustaría que cerrara Gerald esta charla dando un mensaje de difusión especial para Guyana y para el resto de América Latina.
So I would like to close this discussion with you giving a message for Guyana and for all of Latin America.
Well, I would like to say that someone said, a great revolutionary said, that history is like a relay race and the baton must be passed on. We are fighting we are part of a revolutionary continuity. We are fighting and carry on we are continuing the fight that started from the indigenous people who resisted colonization, and Tupac Amaru. We carry in the tradition of Dessalines in Haiti, of Simon Bolivar, and all the different slave uprisings. We carry on in that tradition. In the tradition of Marcus Garvey, we carry on that fight. We carry on that fight Jose Marti, the great Mexican and great Mexican freedom fighters like the guerrilla group was named after the Zapatistas.
Mm-hmm.
We carry on in that tradition of Zapata and all of those. So we have collected the baton, and we will go right through. We have to, there's no substitute for organizing and for conscientizing the people. The people must know what they are fighting for. The major parties, they're not in the business of educating the people. They're not. And we always emphasize the concept, the idea of education for liberation. In the Freirean tradition of conscientization, of what Paulo Freire wrote in Pedagogy of the Oppressed.
Bueno, un gran revolucionario dijo que es como una carrera de relay.
De resistencia. Ajá.
Sí, hay que pasar el bastón. Entonces seguimos las luchas de José Martí, de las zapatistas, de Dessalines. Seguimos esa lucha. Y para nosotros es bien importante la conciencia de la gente. El pueblo tiene que saber por qué están luchando. Entonces, cuando hablamos de los demás partidos de la derecha, no creen en la educación de la gente, pero organizar, educar es fundamental y seguimos con ese entendimiento de Paulo Freire, con la pedagogía de los oprimidos. Entonces, eso es nuestra idea, eso es nuestra lucha.
Yo les quiero agradecer este tiempo que nos dieron, a ti, Kandis, especialmente por traducirnos, y a Gerald por hacernos escuchar su voz. Y les mando un fuerte abrazo y quedo pendiente porque me interesaría después, en un futuro muy cercano, volver a convocar a Guyana, sobre todo que se está volviendo el centro de crecimiento en América Latina. Sabemos que hay un despertar muy fuerte en Guyana, que van a sucederse muchas cosas por eso.
So thank you again. Thank you for the interpretation, and we await that call to support you in your struggles in Guyana in the very near future.
Yeah, just before you go, I am listening to my brother Hector, and I'm seeing a volume there marked Theologia and Theology.
Estoy escuchándote, Héctor, y estoy leyendo teología. Es un libro sobre teología.
Yeah, because my politics, revolutionary politics, is very much informed and shaped by the liberation theology of Gustavo Quinteres and others, you know, and the Black liberation theology of James Cone. Yeah.
Porque mi formación está bien impactada por la teología de Gerald, the name?
Gustavo Gutierrez.
Gustavo Gutiérrez.
Mira, qué interesante, qué interesante. Pues es bueno eso. Ya les quito, no les quito más tiempo y estamos en contacto, Gerald. Gracias. Les mando un fuerte abrazo. Gracias. Buen día allá en Guyana y buen día allá en Trinidad y Tobago, donde está Kandis.
All right.
Thank you very much, and Kandis. Excellent translation, my sister. I'll call you.
All right.
Coincido. Gracias,
Yes.
buen día.
All the best, brother Hector. Yeah, gracias.
Chao.
Yeah. Okay.